I like this watch. I don't like everything about it, but yep, overall, I like this a lot. If that's all you wanted to know, there it is. Now go play outside. If you want to hear more, giddy up. The Zenith Revival Shadow. This watch came out in 2020, and you'd think that with a name like Revival that it's some sort of reissue or re-release, especially knowing Zenith. In the last few years, they brought back several 50-year-old designs in celebration of the 50th anniversary of the El Primero movement. But this watch never existed. So what exactly is being revived here? The Revival Shadow is an amalgam of two watches, a combination, much like how watch collecting is an amalgam of a high-priced drug addiction and playing dress-up with your friends. We like to have fun, don't we, folks? There are two watches that this Revival Shadow takes inspiration from. First is the 1970 Zenith prototype watch, sometimes called the Shadow. That watch used a manually wound movement and was housed in this cushion-shaped case made of steel and treated with black PVD. The watch was never commercially available, but a few have popped up on the vintage market. The second watch this Revival Shadow draws inspiration from is the El Primero A384. The A384 was one of the three OG El Primero watches from 1969. Over the decades, it wasn't the most famous or most popular El Primero watch, but Zenith recently revived that too, and I'm glad they did. So from the prototype, we get the dark case and dark dial, that shadowy look. From the A384, we get the case shape with its angled lugs and everything else that goes with that. And the result is a Revival watch that's actually completely new, and I think that's pretty great. Watch companies love going into their archives and remaking watches that they already know people are gonna love. Zenith has done it plenty, Omega does it, Vacheron just did it with the 222, which I can't stop thinking about. So it's really refreshing to see a watch that is genuinely new and at the same time has clear influences. Not just clear influences, but unusual ones. So what's old and what's new here? The case shape is old, and that's a good thing. It's 37mm across, 47mm long, and 12.7mm thick. It has about 19mm lug widths, but I've had no problem fitting a 20mm strap in this watch. It has 50 meters of water resistance and weighs just about 60 grams on the strap. How is it so light? Automatic chronographs are usually pretty heavy. Turns out this watch has been doing an intermittent fasting regimen, and the results have been incredible. No, it's titanium. Titanium is 40% lighter than steel, and it's another departure from the 1970 Shadow prototype, which used PVD steel. But like the 1970 Shadow, this case is still treated. That's why this case is so dark and why it has this matte finish. Zenith calls this process microblasting, which I assume is like sandblasting but with itty-bitty grains of sand. The watch lists for $9,000 and comes on a strap that Zenith refers to as Cordura Effect. From my experience with Zenith straps, I think this is a fully rubber strap with a top texture that looks like woven nylon. The strap looks good, but I found the inner edges to be sharp on my delicate snowflake wrist. And because of that, I've been wearing the watch on this pass-through strap that I got from Cincy Strap Company, Houday. It's 20mm and fits almost perfectly. On my 7-inch wrist, this is a really interesting size. And I mean that literally interesting and not how the Brits use the word. Yes, interesting. What's interesting is that I think this is a large 37mm. A lot of watches have gone through my hands and onto my wrist, and on sight I would have guessed that this was a 39mm watch. And I think that has everything to do with the case shape. This case shape isn't square, clearly, but it ain't round either. So what you have here is a watch with a surface area greater than most 37mm round watches, and longer too. At 47mm long, this watch has the same length as many 40mm watches, like my Rolex Explorer 2 and GMT Batman. So you see, interesting. And on my 18cm wrist, it's just great. I really like having this combination of dimensions and design. In size, this feels like a vintage watch, and I think that's going to appeal to a lot of collectors. The angled and squared lugs are the most obvious hallmarks of the A384 case, but there's also bevels that run along the top sides of the case, and quite a bit of elegance in how the top of the case slopes down and away from the heavily domed sapphire crystal. And since this is a Zenith, what's inside the case is almost as important as what's outside of it, maybe more important. Inside the Revival's shadow is the El Primero 4061 movement. Like all El Primero movements, it's a chronograph that oscillates 10 times per second or at 5 Hz. That theoretically improves timekeeping accuracy and increases the resolution of the chronograph functions. But unlike most El Primero movements, this one does not have a date. The El Primero 4061 has 50 hours of power reserve, it uses a silicon balance wheel, and it uses a pallet lever that requires no lubrication, which sounds like a personal choice. The movement is finished. It's finished. I don't find this very impressive. There's Côte de Genève and there's perlage, but I've seen better finishing on watches at half this price. But you're going to be looking at the flip side anyway. There's running seconds at 9 o'clock, chronograph minutes at 3 o'clock, and chronograph hours at 6 o'clock. The tachymeter track and subdials are matching gray and the dial is black. The markers in 3 hands are filled with green superluminova. It's not impressively bright, but I have found it useful when entering a dark room from outside. I like color on a watch. I like fun and joy in a hobby that many of you take way too seriously. And this watch looks very serious, but I dig it. It might not be a beach party, but it's original, and it's clearly not trying to be a tactical watch like so many dark watches. I don't see any pretension here. It's dark because dark looks cool, not because it's being marketed for use in covert ops. There is one complaint I have about the Revival Shadow, and it's about the microblasted finish. I think it's wearing through. This is a review unit, and I don't know how rough people have been with this, but it's clear that there are places where the matte finish is either scratching or wearing off. This might just be because it's titanium. Titanium is 40% lighter than steel, but it's also 40% softer on the Brunel scale of hardness. And many titanium watch owners know this firsthand, or first wrist. I actually think this could look great after a few years of wear with the hard edges almost polishing, but for people like me who like to keep their watches pristine, it's a hard knock life for us. What I don't know is, unlike PVD or DLC, can this be easily re-microblasted? You certainly can't take it to somewhere locally and have it buffed out or brushed. What is the refinishing process like, if there even is one? Yeah, this is the kind of stuff I think about when I'm considering a watch purchase. A lot. Welcome to my brain, population 1 billion thoughts. I tend not to buy chronographs anymore. I came to that decision from buying them. First, I don't use the chronograph functions, and second, most modern chronographs are too thick or too heavy. Now, I have and wear large time-only watches, but I've had a hard time finding chronographs that feel like the right size for me. This Revival Shadow, this addresses some of those issues really well. Many El Primero watches do, in my experience. This is a very modern chronograph with one of the best movements at this price, that feels like a vintage chronograph, feels, but not looks. There's no tan loom here, and there's not even a watch that ever looked like this. Again, it's an amalgam. The word of the day is amalgam. When I first tried this watch on a month ago at a store in Chicago, I was surprised by the feel and look of this watch, and surprised by how much I liked it. And after a few days of wearing it, I feel the same. This watch isn't perfect, and it ain't cheap either. It's kinda niche in its looks and its history, but I see this finding a place on the wrists of knowledgeable collectors who like wearing timepieces with a deep backstory. A watch that someone could wax poetically about to their captive friends or their polite acquaintances or even their YouTube audience.